Talking about today, we're talking about intermediate to advanced track day preparation. So going to go over some car prep and some safety equipment and what to look for in an instructor potentially. And so if we just start with car prep, biggest thing that I see at the track and I've had happen at the track, I've been going to the track for almost 3 decades, is brakes. Brake fluid boils over, you get a spongy pedal, you basically can't go out on the track anymore. So the way you fix that is by putting better brake fluid in the car. We use Motul. This is RBF 600. It's a great fluid. It's very reasonably priced. I think it's under 20 bucks a liter. Has a really high dry and wet boiling point. If you need something a little bit more higher temperature rated, and what's important on these is the wet boiling point, because brake fluid's hydroscopic, so it's essentially as soon as you crack the seal on this, the dry boil, you can throw the dry boiling point away. So this has a much higher wet boiling point. I want to say those are 23, 25 bucks a liter, something like that. So it's a little bit more expensive, but it's nothing crazy. And you probably need 2 of those to go to a track day and bleed your brakes. The other thing you're going to need is one of these. And we do sell all this stuff, but that's not the point of this video. This brake bleeder will let you bleed your brakes by yourself at the track. So between this guy, a couple pints of, or a couple liters of fluid, and one of these catches, and a few wrenches, you'll have everything you need to bleed your brakes at the track. If you use the good fluid like the 660 right out of the gate, you probably won't need to bleed your brakes at the track. It has a high enough wet boiling point that it's probably a non-issue, but a lot of it's going to depend on how the car is set up, how fast you're running, what kind of tires you have, what kind of brake pads you're running. So speaking of brake pads, Brembo RE10s are our go-to pad for endurance racing, or like a crossover pad from street driving to the track. It's actually a racing pad, but it's meant for endurance cars. It still has good torque at low temperatures, so your brakes will work cold on the street. You can just pull out of your garage and drive to work, and other than an occasional squeal or some brake dust, you probably never know you have a racing pad on there. When you go to the track, it'll work to very high temperatures. It has a very linear torque curve on it. So it kind of always gives you the same thing every time you get on the pedal. A lot of pads, a lot of like sprint racing pads have very low torque at cold temperatures, and they're also very aggressive on the rotor, and they'll shred the rotor at cold temperatures if they stay cold. So you don't want to run those on a street car. And then also their torque curve, depending on who's making a brake pad, and all this information is available from the suppliers, but a lot of times the torque curve goes up pretty fast, and so if you keep it in like a middle range, you have a nice pedal feel, and like it's all very linear and nice, and then you get it a little bit hotter and all of a sudden it starts biting really hard, and so that can be tough to deal with. Absolutely tough as a novice driver, and it can be difficult as a pro driver to deal with that. So that's why we generally recommend the endurance pads. So the RE10s are go-to, but Pagid makes the RSL 29, which is known as Pagid Yellow. That's a good pad as well. I find they're a little bit noisier, a little bit dirtier than the Brembo pads, but it's still a great pad. And the Brembos are available for all the Brembo racing calipers, and they're available for Porsches, some BMWs, but the Pagids have a much wider range. So if you have a car that doesn't fit in one of those things I just said, Pagids are probably what you want to look at. And they're all about the same price. They're not cheap, but they last quite a while. And when you look at the expense of going to a track day, you don't want to get sidelined because you ran out of brake pads. I've taken a brand new Subaru from the dealership to the track, vaporized a set of brake pads within 4 sessions, and cooked all the seals out of the calipers. So, and that's just on the tires the car came with. So that brings me to the next thing. If you put Arcflash or slicks on your car, it changes that whole curve of all that stuff. So once your tires have way more grip, your brakes are going to get a lot more heat in them, because you can brake much harder before you get into ABS, or if you have an older car, maybe it doesn't have ABS. But you can use your brakes a lot more aggressively with slicks on the car. So the stickier your tires get, the more work the brakes are going to be capable of doing. And as you go faster at the track, you're going to start stressing the brakes more and more. So it's kind of this curve that as you get better, you want better tires. And as you get better tires, you're going to need better brakes. And so it's just on and on. That's just how the game's played. But For example, on our endurance cars, we run a Hankook RS4, which is a 200 tread wear tire. It's not super grippy, but it actually is a really nice track day tire that lasts a long time. We get about 20 race hours out of them. And I'd imagine for track days, you can get an entire season out of them. Whereas if I go to track days on a set of Hoosier slicks, I get 2 days out of them, that's it. So a weekend and they're gone. And that's, you know, that's $1,600 in tires gone in 2 days. So, you know, these are all things to think about with your budget and your goals as far as how fast you want to be. But the R comps, like the, you know, Toyos, the R 888s, any of the 100 tread wear tires, those are kind of a nice medium spot where it's not going to destroy your car from a grip standpoint. It's not going to wear out wheel bearings immediately. It's not going to wreck your brakes. And they have a lot of performance to offer and a reasonable price and a reasonable lifespan. But I would consider something like that RS4 if you're a medium driver and you want to be able to go fast, but you don't have the budget for slicks. That's a good tire that it's not going to give you the performance of slicks, so don't get me wrong there, but it will last you a whole season. And so I think that's a good tire to look at. Couple that with some Paget RSLs or the RE10 Brembo pads and some good fluid, and you'll be set up in the car for a season. So then the next thing would be safety equipment. Obviously you need a helmet. It needs to be within date range, and a lot of track days will check, so don't try and take an out-of-date range helmet, because that's a good way to find yourself at the track not able to drive because nobody wants to loan you their helmet. So just make sure you have an up-to-date helmet. The other thing I would suggest is a set of driving gloves. Driving gloves give you time to get out of the car if it caught on fire, which is not unheard of at track days, but it is pretty rare. So I wouldn't plan for the worst and hope for the best, right? So let's say you roll your car over, it's on its lid, and you're trying to get out of it, and maybe it's on fire. Having driving gloves on that'll let you unbuckle your seatbelt and maybe get into a glove box to, you know, get your little hammer thing to break the window, whatever. It buys you some time to get out of the car in a safe manner without getting injured as badly. I generally wear a full racing suit, even if I'm just at a track day. And often I'm actually driving race cars at track days, so I think it's a good idea to have that suit on anyway. But I don't expect everybody to go out and spend $1,000 on a driving suit so they can go to track days. But if you're gonna spend money on something, get gloves. I think that is the first thing you should get. And get some driving shoes. And whether they're like full rated driving shoes doesn't really matter, but that gives you the same foot platform to work the pedals with. And especially if your aspirations are to get into racing, you'll learn the heel toeing and just the pedal box with the same style of shoe you're going to race in eventually. Hans device would be the next thing. The only problem with Hans devices, typically you need harnesses for that. Definitely my Hans device requires it. They do make some that actually have a harness that straps around your chest, and you can use that with a standard shoulder belt. I don't have any personal experience with those. I'm sure they work great. And I think with most of these things, I'd always lean on the side of safety. So if it's in your budget, that's definitely something to consider. If you're using a traditional Hans device, what we don't recommend is a harness bar. Depends on the car. There's some cars that have really good roll structures from the factory, and it's not so much a safety issue with the harness bar. But if it's a coupe or a four-door, it basically turns your back seat into no man's land. I mean, people can't sit back there, and let alone get in there if it's a coupe. So these are all things to think about as far as like what you're doing with your car, and if you're basically turning it into a race car at that point. So what we do recommend is if you're going to run harnesses, do a half cage or a full cage. Then it's all safe. But if you're going to run a full cage, it's definitely not something you want to be driving around the street, you know, unless you want to wear a skateboard helmet all the time while you're driving. So race cars are race cars, and they make terrible street cars. So leave those for racing. I think one of the last things I'd touch on is instructors. As you get more advanced, you're going to want an instructor that knows a little bit more about your car. They don't necessarily have to drive your exact same car, but you know, if you're driving a 328 BMW and they have an M2 competition or an M3 or something along those lines, rear wheel drive, same general physics are going to apply to all those cars. It's just going to be at different velocities. So they can provide a lot of good feedback to help you get faster in your car. And maybe they drive a 328 and you have an M2, who knows? But the idea is the same between those. A Porsche, for example, like an older rear engine Porsche, that has very different behavior. Really bad lift throttle oversteer, et cetera, et cetera. That's a car you want to know how to drive. And hopefully your instructor knows something about it if you're really going to push it on the track. I wouldn't rely on information from somebody who races a front wheel drive car and has never driven a Porsche if you're trying to get the most out of your Porsche. So that's where it'd be good to connect with the right instructor that actually can apply firsthand knowledge to what you're trying to do. Generally speaking, anybody with racing experience that's instructed intermediate to advanced level drivers, they're going to be fine. But there are differences. There are race coaches that only coach novice drivers. Basically, get you to your first track day, get you around the track safe, and that's awesome. And they don't want to get in a car in the passenger seat with a really fast driver or a fast car, mainly just for safety reasons. And I don't blame them. When you're in a fast car with somebody, it can be very scary depending on their experience level. So, and you never really know. Everybody tells you, well, not everybody. A lot of people tell you they're expert drivers. They don't know how to drive. They just watched a lot of Drive to Survive on Netflix and they think they're experts. So finding the right instructor that's comfortable teaching you what you're wanting to learn, and hopefully in a vehicle that's at least somewhat similar to yours, that's a good thing to look for, a good goal to have. And I think just in general, once you start doing more and more track days, you're going to be faster, and your experience is going to grow quickly. And so you need to start deciding what you want to get out of it. And it might be that you just want to do track days, or it might be that you want to go racing. So those are all things to keep in mind for when you're selecting an instructor to help you out with your goals.